Human history is full of events that shaped how we live today. Brief moments in time have the potential to radically shift how we view the world or ourselves. This seems to be happening at an alarming rate at the moment. From the lingering effects of the 2020 global pandemic to increasingly divisive politics, the fact that our world seems so connected through technology and social media means we are, perhaps, more susceptible to experiencing world-shaking events than ever before. To put our current worries into context, keep watching as we count down 7 unforgettable events that shook the world. Number 7. The Chernobyl Disaster. In April 1986, a routine safety test of a Soviet nuclear power plant went horribly awry, causing 190 tons of radioactive uranium to explode into the Earth's atmosphere. At first, the Soviets tried to keep the scale of the disaster under wraps and downplayed it to the people of the nearby town of Pripyat, even during their evacuation. As the cloud spread across Ukraine, the Soviets continued to suppress news of the disaster until Swedish scientists detected a massive radioactive fallout. They tracked the nuclear dust cloud to its source near Kyiv and pressed the Soviet government for an explanation. Under international pressure, the Soviets were forced to admit there had been an accident at Chernobyl, and newspapers across the world began printing reports and tracking the airborne radioactive materials. The press went into a tailspin, printing stories of how the area and the world would be affected for years to come. The dangers of nuclear power came to the forefront, and many began questioning the sustainability of nuclear power. However, despite claims that thousands had died as a result of the disaster, the UN estimated death toll only directly links 50 deaths to the disaster, although it is believed that thousands may die in the future due to radiation exposure. Number 6. The sinking of the Titanic. In 1909, construction started on the world's biggest luxury passenger ship. It was the Edwardian era, and significant advancements in culture, technology, and science gave the world a sense of optimism and progression. The Titanic was marketed as an unsinkable ship, and its conception came from a fierce rivalry between 2 main competitors in the transatlantic passenger trade, White Star and Cunard. Cunard seemed to be edging ahead when it created 2 new passenger liners that broke the record for the fastest transatlantic journey. Instead of trying to compete with their speed, White Star chairman J. Bruce Ismay decided he would focus on comfort. The Titanic was built with ornate decor, first-class dining facilities, 4 elevators, and a swimming pool. Even the ship's modest third-class accommodations were relatively comfortable. It was, ironically, built with safety in mind, and 4 compartments that could be sealed off in the event of a hull breach were constructed. This feature led to the claim that the mighty vessel was unsinkable. The Titanic's maiden voyage was set on April 10, 1912, and it met with much hype. The voyage was nicknamed the Millionaire Special because of the number of rich and famous people eager to be a part of this monumental crossing. Of course, we all know what happened next. At 12:20 a.m. on April 15th, a ship owned by White Star's rival company received distress signals from the crew of the Titanic. Although other ships also responded to the call, it was this vessel, the Carpathia, that would arrive at the scene first. At around 4 a.m., Ismay, who had been aboard the Titanic and had managed to secure a space in a lifeboat, sent a communication to White Star Line's offices that read, "Deeply regret to advise you, Titanic sank this morning 15th after collision iceberg, resulting in serious lost life. Further particulars later." With over 700 survivors on board, the Carpathia headed to New York. News of the tragedy had already been sent, but early reports claimed that the Titanic was being towed to shore. Modern wireless technology meant that other countries, including Australia, were able to get up-to-date information about the tragedy. When the full scale of the disaster became clear, the news that modern technology was still no match for nature shocked the world, and they scrambled for tangible mistakes that would explain the tragedy and allow them to assign blame. Number 5. The building of the Berlin Wall. After the Second World War, Germany was divided into East and West. The East was controlled by the German Democratic Republic, which was allied with the Soviet Union, and the West was a combination of the American, British, and French zones called the Federal Republic of Germany. By 1961, around 2.5 million East Germans had fled to the West. and the loss of increasing numbers of intellectuals, professionals, and skilled workers began to undermine the economy of East Germany. As the sun set on the night of August 12th, Berliners could not imagine what a different city they would wake up in. Those who lived near the border began to hear yells and cries and, upon investigation, found that a barbed wire and concrete fence was being erected between East Berlin and West Berlin. Fear and panic gripped people as they desperately tried contacting friends and family on the other side of the barrier, with no success. Days later, the fence began to be replaced by a concrete wall, and the Berlin Wall grew, steadily guarded by armed forces. Although Germany tried to downplay the erection of the wall, the news soon broke internationally. The Berlin Wall became a physical embodiment of the so-called Iron Curtain and a symbol of the breakdown in diplomacy between the East and the West. Number 4. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand. In the early 1900s, conflict broke out in the Balkans, and a power struggle ensued. Austria-Hungary was one of the major powers at the time, and it annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1908. The Serbian government, which wanted to unite with Bosnia and Herzegovina, realized that Austria-Hungary's actions made this impossible. The Austrians were trying to find diplomatic ways to end the Bosnian crisis, and the biggest supporter of peace was the unpopular Archduke Franz Ferdinand. On June 28, 1914, Franz Ferdinand and his wife planned a disastrous visit to Bosnia and Herzegovina. This visit stirred up Serbian nationalists in the area, especially as the date of the visit coincided with the anniversary of the Turkish victory over Serbia. Ferdinand's open-topped car was attacked when a grenade was thrown at the royal couple, and in the confusion that followed, they found themselves in a side street. 19-year-old Serbian national Gavrilo Princip seized his opportunity and shot Ferdinand and his wife with a pistol before turning the gun on himself. However, he was stopped by bystanders before he could kill himself and would later die in prison of tuberculosis. Despite Ferdinand being largely unpopular with the Austrian elite, the killing outraged the Austrians, who were then in consensus about outright warfare. The killing of the Archduke would directly lead to the declaration of World War I 2 months later, which in turn would lead to Hitler's rise to power, the outbreak of World War II, and the horrors of the Holocaust. Number 3. The first man in space. The space race was off and running in 1957 when the Soviets launched an artificial satellite called Sputnik into orbit. This made the US and Russia compete about who could go the furthest into space first. On April 12, 1961, Yuri Gagarin boarded a 4.75-ton Vostok 1 spacecraft and was launched into space. Just under an hour and a half later, he touched down after orbiting the Earth. While the Soviets had kept the launch quiet, the touchdown was international news. The world's first astronaut was Russian. While Soviet authorities celebrated and the U.S. space program licked its wounds, the rest of the world was in awe that a member of the human race had broken free of Earth's gravity and soared above the atmosphere. Gagarin's flight spurred on the space programs, leading to the moon landing, receiving images of Mars, and our desire to explore the galaxy. Number 2. The bombing of Hiroshima. In May 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally, officially ending World War II. However, the Japanese continued to fight, refusing an unconditional surrender to the Allies as they wanted to keep their emperor and refused to be occupied by American forces. However, America was adamant that unconditional surrender was the only way to end hostilities. Feeling they had no other choice, the American government decided that they would use a weapon that they had been developing in secret, an atomic bomb. On August 6, 1945, the Americans dropped a uranium bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, a plutonium bomb was used to destroy Nagasaki. At first, reports asserted that although the American military leaders did not want to utilize nuclear power, they determined that it was the only way to stop the hostilities. The shocked awe turned to horror within days when the event's ramifications became apparent. Winston Churchill asserted that the bombings should arouse the most solemn reflections in the mind and conscience of every human capable of comprehension. The so-called father of the atomic bomb, J. Robert Oppenheimer, celebrated the success of the first bomb, but was utterly devastated by the second, which he deemed unnecessary. His reservations got him ejected from Harry Truman's office and labeled a crybaby scientist after he exclaimed that he felt he had blood on his hands. The rest of the world was shocked, contemplating the devastation should the bomb have been used on their country. Since the bombings, the threat of all-out nuclear war and mutually assured destruction has hung over our society. Today, a potential nuclear attack is still a pressing danger, exacerbated by current political tensions. Number 1. The attack on the World Trade Center. The Twin Towers of Manhattan's World Trade Center became an iconic part of New York's skyline after construction began in the late 1960s. In 2001, they were destroyed by the terrorist group Al-Qaeda in an attack that shook and shocked the world. Al-Qaeda was an extremist global terrorist network that declared a religious war against those that they saw as being without religion. These nations included Israel, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the United States, whom they saw as a supporter of the infidel governments. Although Al-Qaeda had carried out attacks on U.S. soil and was on the government's radar, officials did not believe Al-Qaeda would be able to carry out a large-scale attack. The shock when a hijacked passenger jet flew into the North Tower was palpable. The news began to be broadcast live around the world, sending shockwaves across the globe. Viewers watched in stunned silence as the event was being covered as a second plane collided with the South Tower. People were seen jumping to escape the building as those on the ground tried to navigate through the smoke and debris. Soon, news came that a third plane had destroyed the western face of the Pentagon, while a fourth plane that was destined for the Capitol building in Washington had crashed after passengers fought back against the hijackers. The effect that the attacks had on America was profound. It exposed that superpowers were inherently vulnerable, as just 19 people had successfully carried out these devastating attacks. For a moment, the world stood with the United States, and an outpouring of sympathy for America led to a global condemnation of the attackers. The vulnerability that America felt after the attacks caused an extreme reaction, one that was not viewed as balanced by the rest of the world. The 9/11 attacks had ramifications far beyond the machinations of the attackers, and the event is undoubtedly one that shook the world. In the comments below, tell us what you think about our choices for 7 unforgettable events that shook the world. What do you think was the most unforgettable? To learn more about history, check out our captivating history book series. It's available as ebooks, paperbacks, and audiobooks. If you found the video captivating, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.